How are you on this long Saturday weekend evening?
Oh, great. Every day is awesome. As long as I wake up and I'm still here, it's a great day.
100%, man. 100%. Thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate you agreeing to doing this and looking forward to chatting with you about Star Trek and your documentary, of course, Trekkies.
I'll share whatever I can think of or make up.
Wonderful, man. Uh, well, are you in LA?
I am, yes, right in the middle of Hollywood.
Wonderful. What are you working on nowadays?
Currently, I'm working on Curb Your Enthusiasm, editing season 12.
Wonderful. It's one show because I'm a big Seinfeld fan when it came out. I've been trying to get into Curb Your Enthusiasm. I just haven't found time. I need to get into it. I mean, it's already 12th season. That's crazy.
Yeah, you're a little behind now with
I
12
know.
seasons to go.
God. How many episodes are there in each season? Still like 14,
10,
16?
10, so it'll be 120 you've got waiting for you when you've got a lot of hours to kill.
Maybe on the traveling, when I'm traveling, that's when I pretty much catch up with most of my stuff is on the plane. But
It's pretty funny stuff.
I'm sure it is. Larry David is a genius. I'll definitely check that out in the next coming months for sure.
I always tell Larry that he's like, I think if they make a list of the greatest comedy personas in history, he's going to be on it, with Buster Keaton and Charlie Chaplin and Steve Allen and Lucille Ball. And then Larry's going to be there and he just goes, I don't think so.
Yeah, he seems like a very modest individual from the interviews that I've seen and all the stuff. He doesn't seem like.
But I think he will be. I think he's going to be considered one of those unique talents.
Well, you look at Seinfeld now. I mean, I don't know if you ever watch it. I was actually watching it again with my wife because she was never into it, and it's such like you pay attention to it over and over again. It's such a genius piece of writing, and there's so much philosophy and psychology in it. Like it's just insane how much depth there is to that show.
Yeah, I think part of the reason I really enjoy working on the show, and one reason that his comedy is so strong, is that because he's fearless. There's no topic that he will not take on, and very few people can take on some of the topics that he takes on and get away with it.
Well, that's what comedy's supposed to be. It's supposed to challenge you, disturb you, make you think, and I'm glad he's doing that. That's awesome.
I mean, speaking, if you want to bring Star Trek into it, what set that show apart from other shows, one of the things is that it took on challenging topics. But in order to make it palatable, they had to set it on other planets and clothe it in aliens and other ways so that they could transpose these issues, half black, half white, Frank Gorshin. It seems obvious, but it was a very difficult subject to put on TV in those days, race relations. But that's the way they did it and got away with it. And it's so simple yet brilliant.
Yeah, no, Star Trek, I mean, it did all those things. I probably didn't pick up on those race relation stuff when I was watching it because I was very young. But looking back at it now, like, yeah, you definitely see that. But for me, aside from all the most amazing episodes, like I don't remember the episodes' names, but the one with the Yesterday Enterprise and then where the time keeps looping. They made a movie like that now with Tom Cruise, Day After Tomorrow. I don't know if not Day After Tomorrow. What is that movie with Emily Blunt and Tom Cruise that came out 5 years ago? Edge of Tomorrow.
Okay, yes.
It was a similar plot where they keep looping in time. But the most powerful episode for me was the second last episode. I don't know if you remember that.
Of which series?
Generations. It was called Journey's End. It was a send-off to Wesley Crusher character when he goes onto the planet to talk to these natives, and then he goes on their side and he goes against the Starfleet. That was such an amazing episode, and nobody talks about that episode as much as they should, just because the way
just like Avatar, right? That's the story of Avatar and Fern Gully and Dancing with Wolves.
Last Samurai, that's the same way. But yeah, no, that Star Trek is just an immense show. I remember it had profound effect on me. But anyways, we'll get to that. Tell me how you got started in in Trek world or in kind of crossing paths with art of filmmaking and where you are right now? Like, how did it all begin, the journey?
Okay, here's a short version, so I won't bore you too much. But
No,
I
no,
grew
no,
up
please.
in the 60s and 70s, and Star Trek was on in syndication every day after school in the afternoon. Star Trek was on. So I've seen every episode of the original series multiple times, and we would commit lines of dialogue to memory and utilize it in our games and playing. And it was just part of the wallpaper of my youth. And I always wanted to make movies ever since I was about age 7 and 8, discovered my father's camera. I didn't know how I was going to pursue it necessarily in those days, but I kept that forefront as I was going to college. And then I moved out to Los Angeles. And when I met Denise Crosby, I cast her in my first feature film in a role. She came in and read for the part. It was shortly after she had left The Next Generation and was doing other things. And she was fantastic and got the role because she's brilliant. And we stayed in touch. And then years later, we were having lunch and talking about these Star Trek conventions she had been attending, as the actors do. And she was describing what that world was like and how bizarre and amazing and funny and strange and cool all at once. And this was before Comic-Con was even a thing. And, right. We said, we can't remember who said it first, but one of us said, I can't believe no one's done this yet. We should make a documentary about this phenomenon. And it was like, yeah, why has no one done it? Let's do it. But we don't know how to make a documentary. And, I had made, narrative films, feature films, but never done a documentary. And I said, well, how hard can it be? Let's just learn it. Of course I learned how it's really freaking hard, and it's not an easy thing to do. It's much harder than it seems. But Denise Crosby and we had our own documentary screening seminar at her house. I went and rented a bunch of videos at the local weird video store that had all the weird offbeat titles. It was called Vidiots. And I got Brothers Keeper and Crumb and Hoop Dreams and a bunch of video documentaries by a documentary filmmaker named Les Blank. And we just watched the movies and talked about them and started brainstorming. And then when one day, not long after, she had a convention coming up at the LAX Hilton. It's called Fantasticon. And she was invited to speak. And most of the original actors, series actors, were scheduled to be there. And we thought, well, here's our opportunity. If we don't do it now, we'll never do it. So we found some producers we had been working with who had produced my prior film. It was an action picture called American Yakuza 2, back to back. And they were intrigued and put up enough money to shoot that first weekend. So we pulled together a crew, a director of photography who owned a 16 millimeter film camera, and he brought it. And we got some short ends, which are inexpensive leftover pieces of film, basically. And we filmed that whole weekend. And the footage was so incredible that we just kept going. And 9 months later, we had a completed movie.
Amazing. And how did Paramount pick that up? Was that through the connection of Denise, or was that just through the response it was getting at screenings and whatnot?
My next book, I'm writing a book. My prior book is about how to edit comedy. It's called Cut to the Monkey. My next book is going to be about making documentaries, and Trekkies is going to be the case study. And you would think that it would have been easy to sell that film to Paramount once it was done.
I don't think it would be easy. That's why I'm asking you. I don't think
we thought it might be easier than it was going to be. That's for sure. It took us 9 months of cajoling and insulting and haranguing and stalking, doing screenings. And Paramount couldn't even be bothered to look at it. We couldn't even get their attention until Universal made us an offer. And then suddenly Paramount was like, oh, wait a minute. Well, maybe we are interested. So we had to screen it for them as well. And it ended up in a bidding war between those two studios ultimately, which pushed the price up
Good.
much higher than is typical for a documentary.
That's amazing. And yeah, it's so right that making documentaries, when we watch it, it seems like it's just a walk in the park. I used to think that
Right.
I never thought of myself doing documentaries, but I just kind of landed in that realm where I've directed 3 feature documentaries, narrative feature documentaries, and it's such a difficult task to do because especially nowadays, especially you have so much footage, but at the same time you're trying to figure out where is the story going. At least for me, I like to follow my protagonist in real time, and I have no idea how the story is going to end. But yeah, it's the most craziest thing, and everybody does think about their film, including myself, oh, it's going to be a piece of cake selling it, but it's not. It's so challenging.
You're only halfway there. When you have your final
Yeah.
cut of the film, that's the halfway point in the process and in your expenditures.
Yeah.
And
Making
the
a
biggest
documentary-
mistake,
Yeah. Sorry, go on.
the biggest mistake that I discovered that people make with documentaries is you think that, okay, we'll just get a bunch of interviews and cut them together.
No.
But a documentary is not just a series of talking heads, as you just pointed out. You put your finger on it when you said it's about story. And a documentary needs a 3-act structure and a protagonist with a goal and obstacles and an antagonist or antagonists or protagonists as much as a narrative feature needs. And that's the real challenge that is hard to figure out.
Yeah. No, it is. But once you do figure it out, it becomes easier. But like I said, it's so funny. Every time I've made a documentary, I always think that, oh, it's going to be tough, which it is. I mean, it's challenges with anything, but that's how you motivate yourself. But by the time it comes to selling it, every time it's the same story. It's like, oh, now the real part begins. Like, because selling is not an easy thing to do. And nowadays, there's just so much stuff out there, as just not even documentaries and everything. Netflix, Amazon, Peacock, Paramount, everybody has streaming platforms, and there's get so much submissions and stuff, and then festivals. But it's fun at the same time. It's storytelling, and that's what we do, and we love doing it. Otherwise, we would have given up a long time ago, right?
Yeah. Well, if it was easy, everybody'd be doing it, right?
Exactly.
And if, let's say, you're an executive at Netflix or Hulu or Amazon Prime, and a filmmaker with a documentary comes to you, what are you looking for, right? Well, you're looking for, okay, I've got 3 great documentaries in front of me. Which one of these filmmakers is going to get the most eyeballs to come to my platform? So you've got to bring the audience as well as the film, and or a way to reach them, or some core group, or a huge mailing list, or you won every festival, and so you've got all this notoriety and name value, something that sets you apart from all the other documentaries that are also probably great, but who's going to watch them?
Yeah, I agree, man. I agree. In terms of Star Trek, are you like more of a original show
Yes.
fan, or all not generations?
Yes.
Or
Full stop. Yes. Because that's what I grew up with. It was the original series. And so that's it. That's the one. That's nothing. There's no time like the first time.
Yeah, I agree.
Right.
I agree.
And
because
I mean, I love the movies, and I've watched every movie, of course. But I wasn't really, I mean, here's the real controversy. I'm not a Trekkie or a Star Trek fan per se. I was a science fiction fan growing up. I loved all science fiction. I watched all sorts of, Time Tunnel and Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea and UFO. And Star Trek was just one of the many science fiction things that I loved. I used to watch sci-fi movies with my dad. He was big into sci-fi. And Mysterious Island, was like blew me away as a kid. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but like these men in a balloon land on this island by accident. They're blown off course in their big balloon, and on the island are these giant monsters and dinosaurs, and it's like, wow, how cool! But Star Trek was among all of these things.
Yeah.
Sorry?
I said it sounds familiar what you're saying about the balloon, the film. It sounds
Like Ray Harryhausen films with animation, stop motion animation. That's what these films generally had in common. I realized later I was a Ray Harryhausen fan to a great extent. I loved
Did
the
he
stop motion animation monsters.
did he also do Jack and the Giant Killer and Sinbad and Seventh Voyage?
He did Sinbad movies, yes.
That I have grown up with Sinbad and Seventh Voyage and Jack and the Giant Killer or Giant Slayer. I don't remember the name, but it
what
had like
really,
giant monsters and serpents and
yeah, and the Medusa. Remember I think it was in a film. What was it called? The Mysterious World of, I forget the title, but it was about this crazy circus that came to town, and one of the things they had was a Medusa with the snakes for hair, which would turn men into stone.
Okay. Yeah.
I that was like, it scared the crap out of me, and I loved it at the same time. So I just loved that world of science fiction and fantasy, and Star Trek was one of the many things that captivated me when I was young. And it wasn't until much later as an adult I knew Trekkies. My brother was a huge Trekkie. I mean, there's a dividing line, right? When someone becomes a Trekkie, I think, and one of the symptoms or giveaways is, have you ever been to a convention? If you've been to a convention, I think you've crossed that line. But also, if you start naming, like my brother named his dog after Bashir, and there's a lot of tells. And I have a good friend who was a huge Star Trek fan, and he's memorized every line of dialogue and could talk endlessly about it, and collects the comic books and the everything. And they're funny people. They're really interesting, colorful, unusual, entertaining people. And what you need for a documentary is an entertaining subject. And so that's what I think struck me originally was, I think this will be really entertaining.
And it was because I had seen it a long time ago, right? Maybe when a couple of years after it came out. I think it was the early days of internet, 97, 98.
Yeah,
And
99 it was released to the movie theaters. 97 we started doing festivals.
okay, so 99 I probably saw it then. And I had forgotten most of it. I mean, it's been like 24 years. And I just saw it yesterday again. And I can't tell you.
Yeah, we just restored it, for Blu-ray and HD streaming.
I saw it on, is it Tubi? Platform?
That's one place you can find it, yes.
Yeah, so I saw it there. And I can't tell you how throughout the film I had a smile on my face, because it was obviously, it was like, something you grow up on, like Star Trek. Like I grew up with Generations, like the way you grew up with the original series. And just seeing these people so serious and dedicated into this world of Star Trek, and they have absolutely no concern about what anybody thinks about them, crazy or whatnot. But that's dedication. And I love that about the dentist office, right? And then the guy who made his own little robot where he kind of goes inside and his head is sticking out and he's going on the sidewalk.
Captain Pike, the Pike chair. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's just crazy the amount of, and then they're building their own stuff. They're building their own projects. Absolutely love the dedication. I mean, the thing with your film was there was 3-act structure, but it was just a pure dedication to the world of Star Trek, and it was just done in such a beautiful way, in a nostalgic way. Like looking back at it, I just couldn't help, like I said, and just smile throughout the film. So thank you for making that, man. It just really
No, you're very welcome. Well, it had to make us, it had to entertain us first. Denise Crosby and I and the producers, we had to be entertained, and we had to laugh, and we had to enjoy it, and we had to feel something. And Denise Crosby really was the heart of the film, and that's why it has some really strong emotional moments, I feel like, as well, because of her connection to the fans and what she drew out of people.
Oops, sorry. What's wrong? Sorry about that. Yeah, so one story that I really loved, and I'm terrible with names from the old Star Trek series, so forgive me. The gentleman who plays Scotty, what's his name?
James Doohan.
James Doohan. His story about that woman who was going to commit suicide. I mean, that was just crazy. The fact that he was able to, over the course of 8-9 years, his connection with her became the reason for her to keep on living. I mean, that's the amount of impact these shows have on people, and we don't realize that.
Yes, huge impact. And that's what we discovered when we went out into the field and started meeting actors and asked them to tell us what's your most amazing story about fandom you have, not knowing what would come up. But a lot of these stories, became the repertoire of these actors when they went on the road and went to festivals and conventions and told these stories. And there's a limited number. I mean, it's sort of common knowledge, I guess, how William Shatner remembered very little about his time making Star Trek, but people would tell him stories, and so he would sort of appropriate stories and start telling them, and pretty soon they became his stories, which he would tell over and over again. But they're stories that everyone loves to hear, and so making the documentary, we loved hearing stories and collected them and narrowed it down to a few great ones from each to try to interweave some kind of a version of a documentary that would hold attention for 90 minutes.
And it did. It most certainly did. I'm looking forward to watching Trekkies 2, which I've never seen. So I got to figure out, I'm curious as to what that one is about. Like, how do you go to that next level after making the first one?
Well, you have two babies on the cover, right? And so it's two.
Yeah, no, I know. I'm just trying to figure out. I'm just curious, and I'm intrigued to see it. But so did you see Generations at all? Like when it came out,
the feature film or the series, The Next Generation?
Yeah, sorry, I shouldn't say it's on Generations because there's a movie called Generations. I'm talking about the series or the films associated with the series of the second show.
I've seen all the films, but I've seen very little of the television series that followed the original series. I've seen episodes here and there, but I didn't go down the rabbit hole of watching every series, which, I mean, there's another tell, right? Yeah. If you're a hardcore fan, you've got to see everything so you can talk about it. Because part of it is going to conventions to talk about these things. To talk about it, you have to have seen it all.
Yeah. And I think the way you are with the original series, I'm like that with Next Generation, even though I did see Deep Space Nine because it came out around the same time when Next Generation was playing and Voyager. They still weren't the same thing as for me it was the Next Generation. Just because when you grow up in whatever you grow up on, right? And you have that deep connection with those characters and those series. And now I haven't seen Picard, which I've heard the third season is amazing. So I'm looking forward to checking that out when it's done. But having said that, when your film came out from Paramount after it was released, what was the reaction that you started getting from audiences abroad, like beyond festivals and beyond executives?
When it was first released into theaters?
Yeah, when I say first release in theaters, I mean like not just from a box office standpoint, but also from the standpoint of people like fans just watching it or non-fans watching it.
Well, I'll tell you all three. The box office, it bombed at the box office, essentially, because they opened it in 320 theaters, which is pretty good for a documentary. Yeah. But on the same weekend as the fourth Star Trek movie, Star Wars movie, which became episode 1 ultimately. But so that murdered us. However, the film gained a huge following after that. And the Paramount strategy was to put it out, and they didn't really put a lot of marketing behind it. They spent very little on marketing. They just kind of threw it out there. But the fact is, if you put it in theaters, it gets reviewed and talked about, and there's an awareness so that when it comes to home video and cable and now streaming, it's done amazingly well. It's huge and hugely profitable. After its long tail of profits have come in. Yeah. So that was the financial result. Very profitable, but not at first. The reviews were largely very positive. I would say about 70 to 80% positive or mixed, and about 20 or so percent hated it. And, can't please everybody. But there was a similar percentage of fans. I would say closer to 10 to 15% of the fans really hated it, and the rest enjoyed it. And the reason they typically hated it, we found, was that they would usually say their biggest criticism was, you just showed the wackos. You didn't show enough normal fans. And my response was, well, wait a minute. Who decides what's normal?
Exactly.
What's the yardstick? As a filmmaker, we're looking for exceptional fans. I wouldn't call them wackos. I would call them, they're really interesting fans because they're the exceptional ones. They really stand out in some way. Who's going to go to a documentary about normal people? Because a synonym for normal is average, right?
Yeah.
Documentaries about average people, even the fans wouldn't go see a documentary about average Star Trek fans. They want to see something abnormal, exceptional, unusual, strange, amazing, funny, intriguing, heartwarming, whatever. It's got to be more than everyday person.
Yeah.
So we incorporated that. But I took that question to heart, and I didn't just dismiss it. And so for the sequel, I even asked that question of fans. I had Denise asked a lot of fans, define what's normal. What's a normal Star Trek fan? And that's one section of the documentary, is fans explaining what is and isn't normal. And of course, there's no agreement. Everyone disagrees, because what's normal is typically what people look at for themselves. The level of fandom that they do for themselves, that's appropriate. Anyone who goes beyond that is a wacko or goes too far, and which is really very subjective, right?
It is. It is. And it's not just limited to Star Trek. I mean, if you know, even growing up in as a kid, like when you're in school or even in the job environment or family or friends, you know, who decides what's normal? If somebody is doing something that is out of the ordinary, people will call you weird, people will call you strange, you know. So who decides that, right? You're absolutely right. Like, people will always talk. And I'm glad that you kind of use that to set that an answer that in the sequel. Now I'm more intrigued to see what that answer was and how you tackled it.
Well, the tagline of the film is, how much is too much?
Nice.
Right? Which is basically, what's too far? What level of fandom is too extreme and should be prohibited? Right?
Yeah.
And who's to say what should be prohibited? That's what's so much fun about that question. And the fans really enjoyed that question and talking about it. And they talk about it all the time.
So did the second one get picked up by Paramount too, or?
Yes. Well, part of our deal when we licensed the first film to Paramount was sequel rights. We had the rights to do a sequel, but they had what's called the first right of refusal, or first right of negotiation. So if we were planning to do a sequel, we had to bring it to them first, which is what we did. I sent a letter to the head of Paramount and said, 7 years later, I said, hey, we're going to do a sequel. Do you want to have first crack at it? And ultimately they did. And we made a deal, which was essentially just a repeat of the first deal, which I said, how about this? Let's make it easy. Let's just take the original deal that took us a year to negotiate and just use that as the template, and we'll make it number 2. And that's basically what we did. And also what's different about number 2 is that we went international. In Trekkies 1, it's really all in the United States and Canada. And in Trekkies 2, we go to France and England and Brazil. And essentially, we got a short list of which countries have the largest number of fans, biggest fandom. And so, of course, something like Germany is going to be on that list, because wherever you find engineers and computer geeks, you're going to find Star Trek fans. And Germany is a country of engineers.
Yep. And so I guess Paramount didn't finance the second film. Was it more so independently financed? It was just a distribution deal?
No, they financed the second one. They gave us a budget.
That's good. That's fantastic. That's really good. Did you ever see Galaxy Quest that came out the same year that your film did?
Yeah, of course. The writers of Galaxy Quest screened Trekkies when they were researching the script, because one of the producers was a friend of Denise Crosby's, and she arranged a screening for them. And you might notice some similarities in, like, there's a character who resembles Gabriel Kerner from Trekkies.
Yes, I was going to say that. Yes, I noticed that for sure. And actually, I spoke to Dean Perisot, the director of Galaxy Quest, and he's such a great guy, such a nice guy. And we were talking about the inspiration of Star Trek. This was like months ago. And I was so glad to see that in Trekkies when I was watching it, that similarity. And I thought I was crazy enough to pick that up, but I'm glad that you mentioned it. I thought maybe I was looking into it too much.
No, this was a direct lift.
No, that's fantastic. And what did you think of Galaxy Quest? Did you enjoy it?
Oh yeah, it's great. It's very funny. It's satire, and it also stands on its own story wise.
Yeah. It actually had a similar fate as Trekkies did, because their marketing department, DreamWorks marketing department, didn't market the film properly, and then later it became like a classic, like a cult classic, like on DVD. It did really, really well, and it generated like a strong fan base. And I wonder sometimes if studios do that sometimes on purpose, or just because it's not worth it, from even though if it's millions of dollars, like, in the long run, they look at the VHS and DVD release dates. But yeah, it had a similar fate as you guys, your film did, but it made up for it later on.
Yeah, nobody really knows what's going to work or not work, and sometimes they've got a limited marketing budget and they have to allocate this to this film, and if they do, it's going to take away from that film, and they probably didn't really understand who the audience was for a film like that, and it's hard to know.
It is. It's funny you mentioned that about the budget and allocation. I remember in my screenwriting class a long time ago, somebody came in from a studio or a production company. I don't remember, but he said, and I still remember this, he said that we have to make bad films, as in like, plot wise and just mindless films, to make a lot of money, so we can put that money into making great films that are not so expensive, like independent versus mainstream. And I think that makes sense still to this day, that sometimes you have to take, because at the end of the day, it's a business. Everything is a business. Like film is a business. Yes, it's an art, but at the same time, it's a business too.
You got to drive people to your screen or to your television set or your streamer somehow.
Yeah.
And so what is it going to be? And how are you selling this? And you can't really sell a product. It's harder to sell a product in a complex, multifaceted way. You really have to pick an angle and work that angle. Like, is Galaxy Quest, is it a comedy or is it a science fiction film?
Yeah.
And films or books or anything that sort of straddles the line makes it harder to sell. I made a film called Suckers about car salesmen. And it really straddles the line between, is it a comedy or is it an action film? Is it about salespeople? What is it? And it's hard. Audiences want a pigeonhole when they're deciding, okay, what should I watch? I want to watch this, that. I want an action film tonight. And if something is between bar stools, as they say, it's harder to get a commitment for viewing from people. So that's one reason why you'll see a lot of blockbuster films are very specifically targeted. This is a Tom Cruise action film. The end. Here it is. We know how to market it. Everyone knows what they're getting. They're going to eat it up with 2 spoons, and it's a success. But then there's other films that's what they used to do in the old days, right? They would give it time to grow legs, put it in a few theaters, and give it time to find an audience. And it's harder because they don't really do that so much anymore. And then with streamers, like, they will just throw things up there sometimes with no publicity. It's just suddenly, here's a new thing on the streamer. Well, how do you know that it's there, and how are you going to find it? And that's what advertising used to do. Right? It would tip you off that something exists. They might put it on their front page for a day or something, but then it's buried, and you need a gimmick, a hook, a way to reach people, so to find your product, to find your film. My film Suckers, I restored that also recently and put that on Amazon, and it has found its audience all on its own as well. It turns out it has a huge cult following among car salespeople. If I go to a car dealership, they go nuts. It's like Francis Ford Coppola showing up at a gangster convention or something. They want to take pictures with me. They want me to sign autographs. That film, that's the audience. We didn't necessarily think of that while we were making the film. because it's kind of an expose. It shows this is how people get ripped off at car dealerships, and that's part of the story. But salespeople love that for some reason. It turns out they love the stories. They love. I guess it's like the way gangsters maybe like The Godfather. It sort of glorifies them while at the same time tarnishing them.
Yeah. Yeah. You're so right about that thing about finding your audience, because I know I was victim of that on my first film, and I learned it from there. Is that so? My first film was about a small village and them trying to survive because of the hurricanes destroying their seawall, which all levels of government in Nova Scotia, Canada, were denying ownership of. And here you have an interracial gay couple that just moved to Nova Scotia, and they lead the activism. I think what happened, and the film did all right, but it was just I was trying to think so many things. Okay, I should cover this, I should cover that. Try to find all the different audience and bring them in. But that's not the case. You have to have a very specific target as to what your story is. Otherwise, audience loses interest, and even if they like it, they're not gonna remember it necessarily.
In my next book about making documentaries, I interviewed a film representative, a film agent, and asked him about sort of that question. It's like, what do you look for in a film that to determine its saleability?
Yeah.
And one of his biggest pieces of advice was, don't try to make a film for everybody. Try to make a film for a very narrow slice of a demographic that's easy to identify. That's going to be much more saleable. And if you're making a sports documentary, well, is it about male athletes, female athletes? Is it about, let's say it's about bicyclists, okay? Female bicyclists who make their own bicycles, or narrower and narrower until it's a very specific group. That's what he can really latch onto, and it's much easier to find a home for.
Yeah, no, I agree, man. It's a challenging thing, right? Like, even if you look at war movies, like sometimes, I don't know if you've read that book. They even made a film on it with Sandra Bullock and Chris O'Donnell. I forget the name, but it was based on Ernest Hemingway's For Whom the Bell Tolls book. It was like a World War II love story, and sometimes you can't figure out if it's a love story or if it's a war movie. And because each elements of the genre were like so equally distributed, there was no subplot. You couldn't figure out what was the sub and what was the main. And that hurts, because it's not targeting the main core of the audience that you think you're reaching, but it's reaching somebody else.
I'm guilty of that too when I'm looking for something to watch. I'm looking for a specific genre or idea or topic. But what I've noticed is that there's generally always a love story in almost everything. Yeah. It's ubiquitous because it's the number one story in almost every movie. Has boy meets girl, boy loses girl, boy wins girl back, or vice versa. Girl meets boy, blah blah blah. It's hard to make a film without that, but that's what we like to watch. Human beings like to have their stories told to them in a certain way. And so it's not like the studios aren't regurgitating cliches on purpose. Audiences like certain stories. And if you deviate from the way they like their stories told to them, they'll go watch something else. And it goes all the way back to the Greeks and Aristotle and the discovering types of stories that audiences want to watch. And it hasn't really changed much since then. This is the way human beings are. There has to be a fight of some kind. You need conflict. If there's no fight in a movie, there's no versus, this versus that, Godzilla versus Megalon, or man versus society, or man and women fighting, over through a divorce. If there's no conflict, you really don't have a story.
Yeah, I agree, man. I agree. I'll send you a link to one of my films. You might. It is actually. We're talking about that thing about boy meets girl. It's not really about that, but it's more about a bigger issue of migration, but at the same time, how one man left his family behind and him trying to figure the band-aid for that while trying to figure out asylum himself. And that's where I think that was the film for me where I figured out, I think I did, that you need to have plot B, and in a specifically plot B way. It's not going to come at the same level as the main plot. Otherwise, the audience is going to get confused and lost.
Yeah, they do. I mean, I find, again, I'm the same way. I notice I want to know at the beginning, who's my hero? Who am I rooting for? And what do they want to achieve? And now, if you introduce that in the first 5 or 10 minutes at the latest, now I'm hooked, and I'm going to stay to the end to see if my hero achieves that goal. If that doesn't, if there's no hero with a goal by the 30-minute point, audiences they get restless. They start looking. They'll change the channel.
I don't even think it's first 10 minutes nowadays. I think it's the first 30 seconds to a minute.
Ideally,
you have to have. I mean, there's so much stuff out there. You literally have to hook the audience in the first minute for them to hang on, and obviously you got to maintain it throughout the entire film, the character journey and rooting for the main protagonist. But you have to hook them on in the first, you have to answer who the character is, what they're trying to do, where they're trying to go, and that's it. Those questions need to be addressed in the very beginning, and then it unravels like an onion, layers of onion unpeeling it until the rest of the movie.
That's why, if you notice, a lot of your favorite TV shows probably they start with a dead body right in the first scene. Now you got a mystery.
Yeah. Same thing with Star Trek. I don't know if the old Star Trek did that. Before the opening, they would have that like a pre, whatever you want to call it, prologue, or you want to call it just the set up the premise, what is going to happen for the rest of the episode. Did the old series did that?
You pretty much get introduced to who the monster is right away.
Yeah. So this was 60 years ago when they were doing it back then. So imagine now it's more needed than ever before because there's so much stuff out there.
In the first scene, they're beaming down to a planet, and some red shirt gets killed by a monster, and we're off and running.
Yeah, no, it's true, man. It's true. And you're working on Curb Your Enthusiasm,
season 12. Yes.
So is this your first season that you're working on, or you've done previous seasons too?
I've been on since season 6, off and on. I missed a season in between when I was working on Veep. But I've been on it pretty much since the middle season 6.
So you've worked on Veep as well, and obviously it's funny, both of them have Seinfeld connections. And which one? Not to undermine any one of the shows, I've heard they're both amazing. Which one you've had the most fun at working? Obviously, one has 6 years versus 1 year. But where did you enjoy the most, and in terms of post-production and editing?
Without a doubt, the greatest job I've ever had is working with Larry David on Curb Your Enthusiasm, hands down. He's so much fun to work with. He's so funny, and he treats everybody well. In contrast to his character on the show, which is an exaggeration of himself. But it is him to a great extent, exaggerating what's funny about his own life and his own neuroses. But just an amazing job. Working on Veep, I worked for 3 seasons, and that was a very challenging job, but it's one of the funniest shows that's been on television, and that was really rewarding. And the Seinfeld connection is when I started on season 6 of Curb Your Enthusiasm, the 3 writer-producers who were working with Larry David were Jeff Schaefer, who's the co-executive producer on Curb right now, and he created The League, which I worked on for many seasons, which is also similarly improv dialogue style. And David Mandel, who was the showrunner halfway through on Veep, and Alec Berg, who co-created Silicon Valley and Barry. And so those 3 people, writers, went off to do other things and have kept me employed ever since.
That's wonderful, man. Are you looking to do something, not now, down the road, like direct something on your own, whether it's a narrative, whether it's a doc or TV, or I mean, right now you're more involved in comedy from what I can see, the Curb and Veep, right? Like, or do something, take on a serious project as an editor?
Absolutely. I worked on Grey's Anatomy for a season, which I really pursued that job because I wanted to work on a dramatic show. And one of the reasons that Krista Vernoff hired me is because she was trying to bring the show back toward its comedic roots. And so she was looking for an editor who understood comedy. And it was still a very dramatic show, but they were bringing back what she called, she said she learned this from the Commedia dell'arte world of theater, what she calls the comedy couple. When you've got the main plot, the A plot going on, it's a very serious plot with lives at stake and people dying or what have you. There's usually a subplot, a B plot of this comedy couple who are trying to get together and everything's going wrong and they're bumbling and it's funny and it offsets the much more serious A plot. And you might notice that it was the interns generally on Grey's Anatomy would be dating each other and having comedic mishaps. And I thought that was a very interesting original source for that idea, and you'll see that also in Star Trek in the B plot. Sometimes there is a love story going on, sometimes with a green alien, but or a woman from the past that Kirk's always falling in love with some woman somewhere, and the love story is never far behind.
Did you ever get asked, or did you ever wanted to work on the relaunch of the original Star Trek, like by J.J. Abrams with the new cast, like the young cast? Did you ever want to be part of that? That came out, I think, 12 years ago. I think the first one came out.
Sure. I mean, yes, I would have loved to, but I haven't stopped working ever since I met Larry David. And I started out making my own films, and your question was, do I want to direct other things? And yeah, I've made a dozen feature films and documentaries, and the documentaries have been a way for me to keep that alive and be directing and producing my own projects on the side. The TV work paid for my documentary passion to a large extent.
Yeah.
But I've also directed TV shows like The Office and The Bernie Mac Show. But editing really captured my heart probably more than anything else.
Is it because, and I'm just guessing, right? There's a part of me, I've always wanted to be a filmmaker, like a director, but this is a long time ago, before even Seinfeld started, or after Seinfeld started. But then I realized there's a thing called editing, right? Which I knew, but I didn't know. And then there are times when I really enjoy editing over anything, but there are times when I can't do it because it's just a combination of sitting there and not being physically on the set. And some people like that kind of environment. You're just kind of with a couple of people, with the director, with the producer, with your assistant editor. Is that something that attracts you more then, or is it more so that you're retelling the story, recreating it, or rewriting it in post?
Well, I like both, and I try to alternate and sort of. The more I learn about directing or writing, the better I am as an editor, and vice versa. So I have alternated and done both over and over again. The directing aspect is really physically challenging. You've got to get up really early and you get no sleep, and it's very stressful because everyone's counting on you and the budget depends on your choices, which is all worth it when it's done and you're finally screening it for an audience. All that pain finally pays off. Editing is a sort of very creative, enjoyable process that I can do every day in a non-stressful environment.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it's very enjoyable to be able to be creative daily without having to get up at the crack of dawn.
It is enjoyable, but do you feel at times, and when I say at times, I don't mean all the time. I mean just like, a random day where you're like, because editing doesn't involve interacting with people as much as directing does, right?
Oh,
Like,
you've
yes,
got to be an
direct-
introvert. You
Yeah,
got to be an
exactly.
introvert to be an editor.
I think that's the thing that a lot of us, and there's nothing wrong with being an introvert. A lot of us don't like that aspect. Not necessarily the stress or getting up in the morning. I think that's a second thought, afterthought, but it's more so about just having to go out there and just you're in charge and everybody's looking up to you and you have to make these decisions and you have to be an extrovert, right? The introvert can't do that, not
Right.
most of the time at least. But
You need to be able to cultivate both sides. You're introvert and extrovert. I'm a natural introvert, and so when I'm directing or public speaking or at a convention or at a film festival, I have to find the extrovert within me, and I can do it. And, like talking to you now, this is the extrovert version of Roger, but I find it very taxing, and it uses up a lot of energy to do so. I'm exhausted after a screening where I've had to answer questions, do a Q&A afterward. Whereas an extrovert, their energy is renewed by that sort of environment. They actually get more energy by being amongst people. And I think that's another symptom of which one am I, right? I'm natural. I can sit in a room for 8 hours and concentrate on editing. There's a lot of people who can't sit and concentrate for 5 minutes on one thing at a time. And so they're not natural introverts.
But I also think, you said that, you have to force yourself to become an extrovert when you're on stage. I don't know you, but at the same time, because I go through something similar, I can't talk about something on the stage that I'm not passionate about, right? Like when I say passionate, I don't mean like politics. I mean just films. Like if somebody else told me like, okay, go talk to something on the stage or answer questions about this, I wouldn't have a clue. I forget about not knowing. I wouldn't even know how to get up on the stage and talk because it's not my domain and it's not something that interests me. And I think the fact that you are interested in it, that's your natural extrovert personality. I don't think you're pushing it out.
Well, luckily it's there, and so I can tap into it when I need it.
Yeah.
And you have to be the part of being on stage, whatever fashion, whether you're an actor or you're doing a Q&A after a screening, or you're teaching a class, or leading a podcast, or whatever. It has to naturally be within you to some degree, and it is in all of us to more or less degree. You have to cultivate it, and then you have to amp it up because you have to be engaging. You've got to engage people. You have to hold their attention. So you've got to become more. You've got to become bigger. You've got to have something interesting to say. You've got to be charismatic. You got to perform. It's a performance. People need to be led. They need to feel your energy because they respond to your level of energy. If you go up on stage and your monotone delivery puts them to sleep, that's not going to work, right? You gotta bring it on.
Yeah. Well, that's why most of the speakers who are really well speakers they know how to perform, whether it's with high intensity or someone like Steve Jobs who would pause for like 5 seconds, then say something and still grab your attention at the same time.
His charisma flowed in his own way, in his own style, and he was a master of the fact that you have to have levels and rhythms. Whereas you can't just yell the whole time. There's moments to be bigger and there's moments to pause and reflect or to bring it down. And it's the rhythms that keep people engaged, because if you're at one level, one gear the whole time, you're going to lose them.
Well, that's the same thing with editing. It's all about rhythms, right? It's all about beats. It's all about...
That's life, right? It's life.
Yeah.
In engaging with people. If you're on a date with somebody, you need to entertain them, right? To hold their attention. And so there are ways to do that, to be less boring. Then there are ways to be very boring. And so whether you're editing, performing, going in for a job interview, I try to remember and be a little bit calculating and manipulative. If I want the job, I have to remember to praise the person right up front. If you got to start with praise, whether it's them personally, the show that they created, or the way they've decorated their office. Find some way to give them a sincere compliment, and then you're starting off on the right foot, because people like people that like them.
Yeah.
And they're more likely to hire you if they like you. So that's the first lesson to getting a job. And the more you can get them to talk about themselves, the more likely you are to get the job, because you're already there because of your resume, right? So they just sort of, the only reason for job interviews is to get a sense, an instinct of, do I like this person or not? And if they get a good sense, then you'll probably get the job. Larry David makes all his decisions through instinct. He often says, I don't know why that's even funny. I don't know why, but I know it is funny. I know it's going to work. And his casting, the show, it's all instinct. He'll meet with someone and he knows very quickly. Like when they cast an actor named J.B. Smoove on Curb Your Enthusiasm, who plays a character named Leon Black. Larry went to meet with him in a casting session, and he said that Leon had the part, or JB had the part before he even spoke a word, because the expressions he made were so funny. Larry was already laughing before he even spoke, and so his instinct was, oh, you're hired. And so the more you follow your instinct, the better you are in general, and it's true for
Everything.
Well, basically for everything, right?
Yeah. When you are working on Curb Your Enthusiasm, are you ever into this? Well, obviously, you probably have the script when you're doing the post-production just to make sure everything is in all the notes and everything. But are you ever given the script beforehand, before you start editing, like before it goes to production? Are you ever on the set watching the performances or watching how it pans out?
Rarely on the set. And yes, the scripts are sent. I don't even read the script. It's almost irrelevant to me what they wrote on a piece of paper, because I am going to react to the footage. The footage tells me what to do. The script was a hope. The footage is the reality of what I have to work with. And so the reason I will read a script, though, is if it's a new product or new project, and I need to know, well, is this good enough to intrigue me to say yes to do the job? So I'll read it for that reason. But when I'm editing a scene, I'll edit the scene without looking at the script. Once I finish a cut of the scene, I'll go back and read the scene just to see if I missed any intent that they had written in there that might be in the footage that I overlooked, as sort of just a fail-safe. But generally, I like the footage to impact me fresh. And the jokes impact me fresh, the way it will an audience when they see it for the first time.
Yeah. And is it a multi-camera shoot, just like Seinfeld?
Well, the old style multicam is sort of dead. There are very few shows that have a live studio audience. But they call it single camera, even though everyone shoots with 2 or 3 cameras at the same time now.
That's what I meant, yeah.
Yeah, there's 3 cameras going at once at all times.
That helps because, I mean, yeah, the audience stuff, they tried that with a show that Jamie Foxx did with his daughter, I think, on Netflix. They had I don't know if the audience was actually they were actually on the stage the way it used to be with Seinfeld, Full House, and all those shows, but you would hear their laughter, and it bombed. It got canceled after 5-6 episodes. But yeah, that system is gone, where the audience laughs, unless it's like a Tonight Show with one of the late night comedians. And in terms of post-production, do you guys do Avid Pro Tools or?
Avid, yeah, every show I work on is an Avid show. That's really the industrial strength version of editing. But the lower budget shows generally use Premiere now at this point. Final Cut used to be on its way to becoming king, and then they blew it when they totally revamped the software.
Don't even get me started. I went to an Apple, what was it called? FCP user meet in Las Vegas in 2009, and they were like, we're going to introduce Final Cut. And I remember the presentation they did. It was the first time they were going to reveal, it was not an Apple presentation, but they were going to give it more depth, more than what Apple normally do at their own stuff. and everybody was like amazed and everything. But literally the next day, everybody went back home and hated it. Like I used to be a Final Cut user up until version 7, and then I switched to Premiere. And
Same
and
here.
then and then I did DaVinci for a little bit, and now I'm getting into Avid. I'm just waiting on next project, whatever that is, and I want to edit that on Avid just to get myself rolling into that, because it just so more stable and more multi-user workflow and everything. But yeah, Avid is the way to go. Avid is the way to go.
I tell editors when they move to Hollywood, if they're looking for work, you may have done most of your work in film school and on lower budget projects on Premiere, but you need to know Avid if you want to move up in the business.
Yeah, you do, 100%. Tell me about your book that you're working on as we come to the closure. Tell me more about the book, and when is it out? Yeah.
Okay, well, the previous book came out last year, and so I've been working on the new one ever since. And this one, I haven't settled on a title yet, but it's about how to make documentaries using Trekkies as the case study for a lot of it. But I also spoke with many other filmmakers, documentary filmmakers like Davis Guggenheim, who you're nodding your head, an Inconvenient Truth is what he won his Oscar for.
Yep.
And I just recently interviewed Ken Burns, and he was amazing to talk to. I mean, he's made dozens of award-winning documentaries. Obviously, the Civil War is what he's perhaps most famous for, and baseball and jazz, many others. And
what about Michael Moore?
He hasn't responded. So, I tried, sent a few emails, and that's all you can do. And so the ones that say yes are in the book. So I've got about 8 or 9 other documentary filmmakers, very successful, as in the business, and a very diverse group whose wisdom that I also include, as well as my own experience in how to make a documentary, how to creatively find the next project, and then how to be successful, financially successful as a documentary filmmaker, because there's a way to do it. And all of the people I talk to have made that their career. And there's a reason why that they've been successful at it. So I really wanted to get to the heart of the business side as well as the creative side, like how to interview people. There's a trick to interviewing people, to ways to do it well, and there's ways to do it badly. For example, if you have someone in an interview chair, you want to ask one question at a time. That seems obvious, kind of, doesn't it? But you might find yourself, and I've seen a lot of interviewers, they'll ask multi-part questions, and people only answer the last part of the question. And if you ask a question, don't start offering guesses of what the answer will be. Talk about being a doctor. Is it like being this, or is it like that? Is it like, no, just let them answer, right? And don't ask yes or no questions. Do you like being a doctor? Yes. And then they're shut down, right? You want to say, tell me what it feels like to be a doctor. Or what was it like when you had that traumatic moment in the ER? Describe everything that happened. Now they're often talking. So there's a lot of tips. Like when I worked on a documentary series called The Comedy Store, which is about the history of this building in Los Angeles and all the comedians who came through it. Every big name comic came through there. And the director is a comedian writer named Mike Binder, who I had worked with before on a film called Black or White and other things. And Mike had never made a documentary before. And so he had already shot several interviews. And my biggest advice to Mike was, after you ask a question, just shut up. Because there's a tendency to want to fill that awkward space because it feels awkward. Let the interviewee fill the space. Just ask the question and shut up. The first person to speak loses. And so his interviews got much better when he started doing that. And those moments of silence actually brought a wealth of really great moments to the documentary as well.
Yeah. One thing that I have learned very early And I never expected myself to pull that off, but you just learn that, as you start interviewing people. I always now, no matter what it is, whoever I'm speaking to, whatever I'm speaking about, my first question is, because most people are comfortable with camera or having, answering in front of this lens, and a director or cinematographer is like, who are you? Where were you born? What's your story? Not in those together parts, but just, build it up slowly, because they know that story by heart because they've lived it. And they become so comfortable in a matter of 10 minutes. And that footage never sees the light of the day. It's just to make them feel comfortable, easy. And then they just go on their business and answering questions as they should.
That's a good piece of advice too. Yeah. And I feel like when I have someone in the interview chair, I want to warm them up. So I'll start with easier questions, right? You want to get them going. And generally easier questions are factual questions. Tell me about how many books you sold, tell me what it was like growing up in Baltimore. Those are easy questions to answer. Now they're getting warmed up. Then you can throw in the difficult questions, wait till you're getting into it, to the middle of the question, so what do you, is it a sin to masturbate? Right? You don't want to open with that one. You want to slip that one in later.
Yeah, I find people are more comfortable. The pattern that I've seen, when you ask them about their childhood, they love answering that because it's something that you have forgotten about, that you don't talk about or you think about as much. And it just takes you back into the memory, and they just love talking about it. And it's not being narcissistic or anything. It's just we all like to revisit that part of our life, in our heads or while talking to family members or friends, and people become comfortable that way. But yeah, no, man, your book is expected to come out this year or next year, you think?
End of the year, yeah, before Christmas, in time for the holidays is the goal. So that's the plan.
Well, I'm looking forward to that. Maybe we can chat about things more as the book is about to be released, and would love to have you on again.
Anytime.
It's been a blast talking to you, man. I really enjoyed it. I hope you feel the same way, and really looking forward to chatting more with you. And if you have anything to add at the end, feel free to.
Well, to me, the most important thing about what I do and what we all do is a lesson I learned when I made my documentary, The Nature of Existence. Mm-hmm. And that's a documentary about existentialism, which it's an impossible topic to make a documentary about, I discovered, because how do you make a documentary about existence, the philosophy of existentialism, which if you want to break it down to listeners who are, what's that? It's basically asking the question, why do we exist?
Yeah.
And philosophers throughout history have been wrestling with that. Nietzsche and Schopenhauer, Camus, I'm not the first person to wonder what's the point of everything. But I became obsessed with that. That's typically what happens when I make a film. I become obsessed with a topic, and then I read a stack of books, 5 feet tall, and learn everything I can about it, start writing questions, and then seek out the experts, many of which are in the authors of the books I've read, and go and interrogate them until I solve the mystery, right? And the mystery, like the mystery of Trekkies, was why this show? Why are these people so obsessed with this TV show? The question for The Nature of Existence was, why do we exist? What's the point of everything? And so I tracked down experts all over the world. Religious experts were the obvious first choice. So I talked to people from all the major religions, and I chased the Pope in Italy, and I talked to the Pope of Atheists, Richard Dawkins, in England, and Christians and Hindus. I went to India and tracked down Sikhs and Jainists and Hindus and Muslims. I went to China to talk to Confucianists and Taoists and ask them all the same set of questions about why are we here and what are we supposed to do with our lives, and is it a sin to masturbate? and I talked to particle physicists and scientists, and I found actually that the scientists were the most philosophical out of everybody, particularly the particle physicists, because they are looking for the original building blocks of the universe, the origin. What is the origin of all the particles? molecules used to be the smallest thing. Then it was atoms, and then it was electrons and neutrons and protons. And then it was quarks, and then it was strings, and it's ever more granular as they keep taking apart the universe. And once they can determine where did those particles come from, then we know where we came from, because we're made of all these things. And it puts them into a very philosophical state of mind, I found. I love talking to the scientists and the cosmologists about what's the point of everything, and is it a sin to masturbate? And here's what I'll give you a quick quote. I asked a physicist at Oxford, what is the soul? And he had the greatest short answer. He said, the soul is a type of wishful thinking that resides in the frontal lobe. Oh, great answer. And that's in the documentary. That's what you want, right? You want a very succinct soundbite that's intriguing, makes you think, it's kind of funny, and perfect. So I collected a bunch of those. And ultimately, what I learned from that whole process of talking to all these people, which is what everyone eventually goes through this, what's the right religion I should be following? What's the right way to live my life? Why do I feel so aimless and pointless? And there's something missing inside me, and I need to fill it. And a lot of people fill it with drugs, or they fill it with raising a child for 18 years until they get old enough to kick him out of the basement, but that becomes the focus of their life. What I learned from that whole process is that we're all trying to be happier, right? The question that we're asking is, how can I be happier? And when I spoke to one of the people in the film, I discovered that that's a false question. It's a false goal, because you can't really pursue happiness. It's a side effect. Happiness is a side effect of having a purpose in life. And so once you know your purpose, once you have a purpose and are following it, chasing it, pursuing it, happiness comes automatically.
Yep.
And so the real question then is, okay, what is my purpose? Well, no one can give you a purpose. It's something you give yourself. And if you look within, you find we're naturally designed to be creative. There's really two opposing forces in the universe. This is my reading and what I learned from all this, right? There's, the yin and yang of the universe is creation and destruction. Stars are being born and they're being destroyed all the time. So you and I, we humans, we can align ourselves with either one of those forces. We can be destructive our whole lives, or we can be creative. And it's easier to be destructive. And I know a lot of people, probably someone comes to mind to anyone listening, someone who's destructive in their life. It's easier to smash things and to tear things down, to critique things, to break things. It's much harder to build things up. And I'll give you some examples. Anyone, you can be creative by hosting a podcast, by writing a book, by writing a poem, by creating a new dance, by planting a garden and bringing forth life. You're creating life by it doesn't matter, poetry or pottery. It's why a lot of people, when they retire, they suddenly take art classes because they need to get back into creating something. And if you find you're depressed, it's because you're not being creative. One reason, anyway. There's chemical reasons and lots of other things at play. But one major reason in modern human society is that people have lost touch with their creative impulse. They've gone to jobs that don't allow them to express their creativity. They're just a cog in the machine. They're moving papers from one box to another. So if you want to be happier, this is what I learned, be creative every day in some way. It doesn't really matter how. It just has to be important to you. And so get a piece of paper and start sketching, or write a poem, or keep a journal. Or if you're an architect, right, you design a house. Or if you're in business, you build a new business plan. I make documentaries or write books or edit projects, edit comedy television. You can find something, making, pottery or painting, whatever. Find something which, you could call it a hobby, that you can do daily for a few minutes a day, make time for it, and express yourself creatively. And you will just generally be a happier person, because now you have aligned yourself with what is innate within human beings, what we need to do. And then you'll finish your whatever it is eventually. Maybe it's a painting or a sketch or a new bicycle or a garden you planted, and then share it with your social group, because we're social beings and we need to receive feedback on what it is that we've created. And that is a self-fulfilling loop that you'll keep doing it, and you'll be a much happier person and a much more productive person than you were if you weren't being creative in some way. That's the lesson I took away from my study of existentialism, and making that documentary about it is what it took for me to learn that lesson. So there's my diatribe.
No, it's so funny you mentioned that. I have this conversation with pretty much every person that I know, is that if you take a lot of people that I know, and I'm sure you know too, they're just doing that mundane 9-to-5 job for security purposes, for cash, for money and all that stuff, which is fine. But I'm like, if you can find something every day for 30 minutes, right? Whatever the hell it is, it's interior designing, it's cooking something, whatever it is, that makes you happy. And you do that for 1 year, 30 minutes a day, and everybody says they don't have time. In 2 years, that thing will become your full-time thing and your job will go away. But the problem is people don't want to follow that because people don't want to put time and effort into it. Everybody has an excuse for whatever reason. And I think that's what and you're so right, man. Like, that's what differentiates people. It's not about money all the time. It's happiness does not come from money in the long run. It comes temporarily, sure, but you have to do something that puts a smile on your face and not just do something that other people are telling you all the time, because that's not happiness. But anyways, we can just go on about this all for a long time.
I concur, Doctor. You're exactly right. That's the problem. Part of what we're fighting against now, though, is the invention of social media, because where people express their creative energy now is in posting a message on Facebook or on Instagram, and it's like candy. It's not really substantive food for our creative needs. It gives us a brief moment of feeling creative, but then that message or that tweet, it's gone. It doesn't exist anymore. There's nothing to show for it. You haven't really created anything that's permanent. Like if you had made a piece of pottery, or if you had written a poem, or planted a garden, those are more tangible and with a result. And so try to stay off of Facebook and stay off of Instagram. I stay off them almost entirely, except when it's time to promote my book, and then I'm on it because then it serves a purpose for me, a business purpose. But I try not to let it suck away my creative energy. I try to avoid it and put my creative energy for 4 hours a day into my writing or my books, or when I'm editing, that takes my creative energy for the day.
Yeah, I think people are just so more in tune to instant gratification and short-term happiness, which they think
it's easier.
Yeah, it's easier. Not just social media. It's just, even if you go and buy like a brand new BMW or I don't know, Maserati, whatever, and you're going to try to impress people out there. Yeah. Or even buying an iPhone. Like, for example, you and I, if we go to Apple Store, I need a new phone. Okay, fine. It will bring me happiness. You go buy it. I guarantee you 7-8 days later at the most, that happiness is going to go away, because it's
called habituation, right? Exactly. Things we get used to it. It's no longer novel. The same thing happens in relationships. Habituation. The person becomes too much the same because you spent so much time together. And so, I made a documentary called The Truth About Marriage, and that's another of my obsessions, that I try to solve the mystery of why is it so difficult for human beings to be in relationships. Something's wrong here. If 50% of the marriages are ending, that product has a 50% failure rate. They would send that designer back to the shop in any business, but not in marriage. Everybody wants one. Everyone's signing up for this defective product, and so why is it? So I became obsessed with that mystery to solve as well.
I gotta watch that. That sounds very interesting. I gotta watch that.
I found the answer. There is a very simple answer. If you want, I'll tell you that one too. How much time have we got?
Go ahead. I can guess the answer, but go ahead.
What I solidified or distilled down out of 100 plus interviews, in an 85-minute movie, if I was going to impart one piece of advice to people listening today in relationships or wanting to improve relationships, here's what all the experts told me. We're all doing relationships wrong to some degree, right? We could be doing better. Let's put it that way. And there's no class in high school for how to have a relationship, which there should be, because arguably the most important thing you're going to do in your life is pick a life partner. And so you should have some guidelines for how to do it better, right? Instead of just kicking everybody out through trial and error. Go figure it out. Good luck. No wonder everybody's having a hard time and there's a 50% failure rate.
Yeah.
If you want to do better, if you're in a relationship right now, I'll give you a little experiment you can try for a week, and you'll see for yourself if this works and improves. You can improve your relationship, your communication, your sex life, your happiness. Everything will get better if you do this. It's basically a very simple thing. When you come home, first I'm speaking to the masculine partner in a relationship. And typically, we all have masculine and feminine traits to some degree. I'm typically more masculine than feminine generally. And some people are the reverse. But what you find is that in most relationships, one partner has more masculine traits and the other has more feminine traits. You don't often find two masculines together and two feminines. Even in gay couples, one is more of the wife and one is more of the husband, whatever you want to call it.
Right.
Well, let's say if you're the masculine partner, your feminine dominant partner needs to be heard daily. So what you need to do is go home and put your iPhone on airplane mode and then make eye contact and say, honey, how was your day? And then shut up. Or honey, how are you feeling? What's new? And then just let that person, let your partner talk for about 15 to 20 minutes. It's sort of like an emotional nutrient that we both need, but the feminine partner needs it more than the masculine partner. And if that person is not getting that nutrient, that need met, eventually they'll start to feel anxious and then angry, and it leads to arguments, and eventually you break up or you go to therapy. So you can avoid therapy, or you can delay it, or you can just make things better by, honey, how was your day? And then listen. On the other side of it, if you're the feminine partner, or the partner with the more of the feminine traits, don't ask for more than 15 to 20 minutes. Don't get greedy. That's the masculine brain can only handle about 30 minutes maximum of emotional talk before it starts what John Gottman calls flooding. Flooding happens, and it's overloading. It's just not designed for more than about 30 minutes of talk about emotions. So get your 15 to 20 minutes, and a lot of couples have time. It's like coffee time, where the kids are away and where they can have their moment. And just try that experiment. Honey, how was your day? Shut up for 20 minutes, then go watch the game. And see if within 1 week, everything hasn't changed a little bit. And the reason why is the emotional nutrition is being fulfilled that wasn't before. That person wasn't being heard, like the eye contact. You're listening. You're actually listening, and don't offer any advice. That's the mistake that the masculine brain wants to offer advice. Well, if you're not happy at work, you should quit your job. And like, you're just making it worse. What you should offer is empathy. And the way you offer empathy is just go, oh, that's terrible. That's wonderful. Don't say anything more than that. Just acknowledge the feelings and listen, and then go watch the game. The other half of it, though, is the nutrition that the masculine dominant partner needs is what John Gray in Men Are From Mars calls going to the cave. The masculine partner wants connection as much as the feminine dominant partner. But once the masculine dominant person has the connection, then the yearning for freedom starts to grow, and he wants to draw away again, and goes through this cycle of connection and disconnection. Whereas the feminine dominant wants connection all the time, and feels like something's wrong if there's a moment of disconnection. So what the feminine dominant partner needs to do to allow the masculine dominant partner to get what they need is to allow for disconnection, allow that partner to go to the club, go on the business trip, to go golfing with his friends. And so the way to facilitate that, the one way is to announce the disconnection. Honey, I'm going golfing with my friends on Sunday. So you've announced the disconnection, and at the same time you announce when the reconnection will happen. And I can't wait to see you for dinner that on Sunday night at 7:00. So now there's no reason for the partner to feel nervous or insecure because it's the disconnection and I know when we'll be back together. If both partners can do those two things for each other, and we all need both, but you just need each in varying degrees.
Yeah.
That's, if I was to distill down the most important advice I could give anyone that I learned from talking to all these experts, that would be it.
I think you should consider marriage therapy.
I just listened to a whole bunch of marriage therapists, and that's what they all said. In essence,
it's true. It's I always say the most difficult thing in life, whether you want to or not want to, is surviving a marriage. Because marriage is difficult. Every day is difficult. It's not that it's bad. It's difficult. It's challenging because there are two different people, two different personalities, and trying to find that balance. And if you can survive marriage, you can survive anything in life. That's just my belief. Because everything else,
it's so challenging, right?
It is very challenging. Not in a negative way. Like, it's both ways, right? Like, it's just two people trying to find the right balance, and you're even discovering yourself too, because then you have to figure out, okay, how to adjust myself to the other person's needs and vice versa.
And there's a reason too that we're out of balance with who we are innately and versus what our culture expects us to be. And this is what I learned from the anthropologists, because we humans evolved in a nomadic society in small groups of 140 or fewer. Which is called Dunbar's number. We can't connect with more than 150 people emotionally. That's the maximum. So
I was watching that somewhere. I think Jordan Peterson, I saw he said that, but go on, sorry.
Because we evolved in these small groups where everybody knew everybody, and you knew if somebody wasn't pulling their weight, and that's how everyone behaved, because everyone knew everybody's business. Everyone shared everything. All they had basically was what they could carry, and as they moved from place to place, when things really changed, it was about 6,000 years ago with the discovery of agriculture, and we stayed in one place now, and we no longer moved around. And then civilization grew, like small towns grew, and then cities, and now it's way more than 150 people, and so we needed laws and different ways of interacting, and now our culture began evolving much faster than we could. And so we live in a culture now that expects behaviors that are out of sync with what is true human nature. And that's why everyone's so freaked out and having a hard time in relationships, because they're not really what's natural for humans, but it's what's natural for our culture currently. Monogamy is the rule of our culture. And so we all are monogamous on the outside, and that's the face we show the world, but we're not really monogamous. What we are is serial monogamists. We're with somebody, and then we dump them, and we're with somebody else through this series of people throughout our lives, most people. And that if we were truly monogamous, we would stay with the first person that we mated with for our entire lives, like a pair of wolves or something, but we don't do that.
Yeah. And just lastly, I would say is that I think one more problem is, and this happens on both sides, husband and wife, is that a lot of decisions or reactions that we make, whatever the conversation is not based on what we think all the time. It's based on what we think the society thinks about it, or family members thinks about it, or friend. And so we are always basing every discussion, I shouldn't say every, but majority of the discussion based around other people's opinion who have absolutely nothing to do with what you're doing. Steve Harvey said it really nicely. He's like, marriage is like a circle. You hold your hand of your partner and you don't let anyone in, period. In terms of your decisions, in terms of your emotions, in terms of your secrets, whatever that is. And but yeah, it's we can always talk about these things. It's a never-ending conversation. But I wish people adapted to it more quickly. And you should write a book about marriage. I think it will do wonders.
I did.
Oh, you did?
It goes
Okay,
with the documentary.
Okay,
It's
so
a
you did.
companion book to the
Wonderful.
documentary. Yeah.
I gotta look into the documentary, and then maybe I'll look into the book too. But this is great, man. I love talking to you. Not just about Trek.
They're all
Trekkies,
on
but
Amazon. If you have Amazon Prime, you can find most of my films.
Okay. Well, the problem is in Canada, a lot of films are not allowed to be seen from the US, so it depends on the rights. So, but I'll check
right.
it out. I'll check it out. Great, man.
Well, it's been a pleasure talking. Thank you very much.
Likewise, man. Likewise. Let's stay in touch, and looking forward to your book. I might be in LA sometime in May if you are free. Maybe our times align. Maybe we can hook up for a coffee.
Yeah. Well, I consider you a friend now, so it would be wonderful.
Take care. Thank you so much, buddy. Have a good one.